The day started like any other for the passengers boarding Flight 457 from New York to Los Angeles. The hum of conversation filled the air as people shuffled down the narrow aisle, dragging their carry-ons and searching for their assigned seats. Some were traveling for work, others for vacations or family visits. Among them was Evelyn Johnson, a 72-year-old woman with kind eyes and a warm smile that had earned her the nickname Grandma Sunshine back in her teaching days. Evelyn loved to travel. It reminded her of the adventures she'd shared with her late husband, Charles, before his passing 5 years ago. Evelyn carried only 2 things with her: a small suitcase packed neatly with essentials and an old photo album wrapped carefully in plastic. Inside the album were faded pictures of Charles, their children and grandchildren. It was her most prized possession, something she always brought along on trips to feel closer to the memories they'd created together. As she reached her seat near the window, she glanced outside at the bustling airport runway, watching planes take off one by one. She sighed contentedly, settling into her seat and placing the album gently beside her. Across the aisle stood Claire Bennett, a flight attendant who had been working for Skyline Airlines for nearly a decade. Claire wasn't having a good day, or month for that matter. Between long hours, demanding passengers, and mounting bills at home, her patience was wearing thin. Her once bright enthusiasm for the job had dulled over time, replaced by frustration and exhaustion. Today felt especially heavy. She hadn't slept well the night before, and her feet already ached from rushing around during pre-flight preparations. As passengers settled in, Claire moved through the cabin, checking overhead compartments and offering polite but clipped instructions. When she reached Evelyn's row, she noticed the elderly woman struggling to lift her bag into the compartment above. Evelyn stretched as high as she could, but the bag was just out of reach. Claire rolled her eyes inwardly, muttering under her breath about how some people didn't plan ahead when packing. She approached Evelyn, ready to intervene, but not kindly. "Ma'am," Claire said sharply, "you need to hurry up. We're about to close the doors." Her tone carried an edge of irritation that made Evelyn pause mid-effort. The older woman turned toward Claire, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry," Evelyn replied softly. "I'll get it in just a moment." But Claire wasn't satisfied. In her mind, this delay was yet another example of incompetence holding everyone else up. She grabbed the bag roughly from Evelyn's hands and shoved it into the compartment herself. Then, without warning, Evelyn accidentally brushed against Claire while turning to sit back down. It was a harmless, unintentional bump, but to Claire, it felt like the last straw. Claire froze for a split second, her face reddening with anger. Before anyone could react, she snapped, "Watch where you're going," she hissed, her voice rising loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. But instead of stopping there, Claire did the unthinkable. She raised her hand and slapped Evelyn across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap, leaving everyone stunned. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her cheek as tears welled up in her eyes. For a moment, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath, unsure of what would happen next. The sharp sound of the slap hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. Passengers froze in their seats, unsure if what they had just witnessed was real. Evelyn sat motionless, her hand still pressed against her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Tears began to trickle down her face, but she didn't say a word. Her silence spoke volumes: pain, disbelief, and a quiet dignity that made the moment even more heartbreaking. It took only seconds for the tension to erupt. A man seated directly across the aisle stood up abruptly, his face twisted with fury. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted at Claire, pointing an accusatory finger. This was Marcus Reed, a young lawyer who had been returning home after attending a legal conference. He had seen everything unfold and couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. "How dare you hit an elderly woman? Do you even realize what you've done?" Claire, still fuming from her outburst, tried to defend herself. "She bumped into me," she snapped back, her voice shrill and defensive. and she was taking forever with her bag. People need to learn some basic manners. Her explanation did nothing to calm the growing anger among the passengers. Gasps rippled through the cabin as people realized the slap wasn't just an isolated act of frustration. It was laced with hostility and prejudice. Several passengers leaned forward in their seats, glaring at Claire. One woman sitting behind Evelyn muttered loudly, "That's not an excuse to hit someone, especially not an older lady. Are you serious right now?" Others quickly joined in, voicing their outrage. "You're supposed to help us, not hurt us." Another passenger called out, "This is unacceptable." Someone else added, "We're paying customers, not punching bags." The once quiet plane had transformed into a scene of chaos, with voices overlapping and emotions running high. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained silent, clutching her photo album tightly as though it were a lifeline. Despite the commotion around her, she seemed lost in thought, her mind replaying the moment over and over again. She hadn't expected this kind of cruelty. Not here, not on a simple flight to visit her granddaughter. But deep down, she also knew this wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Over the years, she'd faced subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, acts of discrimination because of the color of her skin. Still, she never imagined something so blatant would happen in front of dozens of witnesses. As the argument between Claire and the passengers escalated, a teenager seated nearby pulled out his phone and began recording the incident. Within moments, others followed suit, capturing videos and photos of the confrontation. Someone posted a clip online with the caption, "Flight attendant assaults elderly black woman. Unbelievable." The post spread like wildfire, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Comments poured in, condemning Claire's actions and demanding justice for Evelyn. Hashtags like #StandWithEvelyn and #accountability air travel began trending within minutes. Back in the cabin, Marcus stepped closer to Evelyn, crouching beside her seat. His tone softened as he addressed her. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need anything?" Evelyn nodded slowly, managing a weak smile despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll be fine," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "Thank you." Marcus turned his attention back to Claire, his expression hardening. "You need to understand the gravity of what you've done," he said firmly. "This isn't just about one slap. It's about respect, decency, and treating everyone equally. What you did was completely unacceptable, and I can guarantee there will be consequences." By now, the pilot had been alerted to the disturbance. Over the intercom, his voice cut through the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption. Please remain calm while we address the situation." Moments later, the plane began descending unexpectedly, throwing everyone into further confusion. It became clear that the flight was being diverted to Chicago due to the escalating conflict on board. As the reality of the diversion sank in, Claire's bravado started to crumble. She looked around the cabin, meeting the disapproving stares of nearly every passenger. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the magnitude of what she had done, and the backlash was only beginning. The plane touched down in Chicago with an unsettling bump, the abrupt landing mirroring the tension that had gripped the cabin since the incident. As soon as the aircraft came to a halt, airport security officers boarded, their presence immediately commanding attention. Passengers craned their necks to watch as two uniformed figures made their way down the aisle, their expressions stern and professional. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mix of anticipation and unease. Claire, now pale and visibly shaken, stood near the front of the plane, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She avoided eye contact with anyone, staring at the floor as if willing herself to disappear. Her earlier defiance had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. When the security officers reached her, they asked her to step off the plane. Without argument, she complied, shuffling past rows of glaring passengers. Some muttered under their breath as she passed, while others openly booed or clapped sarcastically. One woman even shouted, "Shame on you," as Claire disappeared through the exit. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained seated, still holding her photo album close to her chest. Marcus stayed by her side, ensuring she felt supported amidst the chaos. He gently encouraged her to take deep breaths, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Though Evelyn's hands trembled slightly, she managed to compose herself enough to speak when approached by one of the security officers. "Ma'am, we'd like to get your statement about what happened," the officer said kindly, crouching beside her seat. Evelyn nodded, her voice soft but steady as she recounted the events leading up to the slap. She didn't embellish or exaggerate. She simply told the truth, describing how the confrontation had escalated and how shocked she'd been by Claire's actions. Her calm demeanor only added to the weight of her words, making it clear that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, but a deliberate act of aggression. As Evelyn spoke, other passengers chimed in, eager to share their perspectives. A middle-aged man seated behind her described how he'd seen Claire grab Evelyn's bag roughly before the slap occurred. It was obvious she was frustrated, but nothing justified hitting someone like that, he emphasized. Another passenger, a young mother traveling with her toddler, added, "I've never seen anything so disrespectful in my life. That poor woman didn't deserve any of it." By this point, news of the incident had spread far beyond the confines of the airplane. Social media platforms were ablaze with reactions as videos and photos captured by passengers continued to circulate online. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the racist flight attendant scandal. Journalists scrambled to piece together details, reaching out to witnesses for interviews. The hashtag Justice for Evelyn trended worldwide, drawing support from people across the globe who were appalled by Claire's behavior. Despite the overwhelming attention, Evelyn remained remarkably composed. When asked by a reporter on board if she wanted to say anything to the public, she hesitated for a moment before responding. "I don't hold hatred in my heart," she said quietly, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "What happened today was wrong, but I believe in forgiveness. We all make mistakes, and I hope this can be a lesson for everyone involved." Her words struck a chord with many, earning admiration from both passengers and viewers following the story online. Even Marcus, who had initially been furious on her behalf, found himself deeply moved by her grace under pressure. "You're incredible, Evelyn," he told her sincerely. Not everyone would handle this situation with such dignity. Once the statements were collected and the initial investigation wrapped up, the remaining passengers were given the option to continue their journey to Los Angeles on another flight. Most chose to proceed, though the mood remained somber as they disembarked. Evelyn, however, declined to reboard. She felt too shaken to continue traveling and decided to stay in Chicago for the night instead. Marcus offered to accompany her to ensure she was safe, and she gratefully accepted his help. As the plane emptied and the last of the passengers dispersed, the reality of the situation began to sink in. What had started as a routine flight had turned into a defining moment, not just for those directly involved, but for anyone who heard the story. The ripple effects of Claire's actions and Evelyn's response would resonate far beyond that day, sparking conversations about respect, accountability, and humanity itself. By the time Claire stepped off the plane in Chicago, escorted by security officers, her world had already begun to crumble. Cameras flashed as reporters stationed at the gate captured every moment of her public humiliation. Passengers exiting the plane behind her pointed and whispered, some shaking their heads in disgust. Claire kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her face flushed with shame. She knew there was no escaping the storm she had created. Skyline Airlines wasted no time addressing the incident. Within hours, a spokesperson released a statement condemning Claire's actions and announcing her immediate termination. "The behavior displayed by one of our employees is unacceptable and does not reflect the values of Skyline Airlines." The statement read, "We are conducting a thorough investigation into this matter and will take all necessary steps to ensure such an incident never occurs again." The airline also issued a formal apology to Evelyn, promising full cooperation with authorities and offering compensation for the trauma she endured. For Claire, Losing her job was only the beginning of her downfall. News outlets dug into her background, uncovering past complaints from passengers who claimed she had been rude or dismissive during previous flights. These allegations painted a troubling picture of someone whose frustrations often boiled over in professional settings. Social media users pounced on the information, labeling her as a symbol of unchecked privilege and prejudice. Memes mocking her circulated widely, while hashtags like #ClaireMustGo trended alongside #JusticeForEvelyn. As the backlash intensified, Claire's personal life unraveled just as quickly. Friends and family members distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Her fiancé, Mark, broke off their engagement after seeing the video of the slap. In a brief phone call, he told her, "I can't support someone who acts like that. You need to figure out what went wrong before you hurt anyone else, or yourself." His words cut deeper than any insult she'd received online. To make matters worse, Claire's landlord refused to renew her lease when he learned about the scandal. Neighbors complained about having a racist living in their building, leaving her with no choice but to pack up her belongings and leave. With no job, no home, and dwindling savings, Claire found herself adrift, forced to move in temporarily with a distant cousin who lived hours away. Even then, she felt isolated. Her cousin avoided speaking to her unless absolutely necessary, treating her like a burden rather than family. Amidst the chaos, Evelyn remained steadfast in her resolve. After spending the night in Chicago, she returned to New York, where she met with Marcus to discuss next steps. Together, they decided to file a civil lawsuit against Skyline Airlines, arguing that the company had failed to provide a safe environment for its passengers. Marcus explained that the case wasn't just about seeking damages. It was about holding the airline accountable for fostering a culture that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. The lawsuit garnered widespread attention, with legal experts weighing in on its potential implications for workplace conduct and corporate responsibility. Advocacy groups rallied around Evelyn, praising her courage and using the case as an opportunity to highlight systemic issues of racism and discrimination in the travel industry. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to speak out, giving interviews and appearing on talk shows to share her perspective. Her message remained consistent. This isn't about revenge. It's about learning from our mistakes and doing better moving forward. While Evelyn focused on advocacy, Claire struggled to cope with the consequences of her actions. She spent sleepless nights replaying the events of the flight in her mind, haunted by guilt and regret. Every knock at the door made her jump, fearing it might be another angry stranger or a reporter looking for a comment. She deleted her social media accounts after being bombarded with hateful messages, cutting herself off from the outside world entirely. Despite the overwhelming negativity, Claire began to realize the depth of her mistakes. One evening, sitting alone in her cousin's spare room, she wrote a letter to Evelyn. Though she doubted Evelyn would ever read it or forgive her, she poured her heart onto the page. "I am so sorry for what I did," she wrote. "I let my anger get the best of me, and I failed to see you as a human being deserving of respect. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope one day I can prove that I'm capable of change." The civil trial against Skyline Airlines began months later, but the anticipation leading up to it kept the story alive in the public eye. News outlets covered every detail, from pre-trial hearings to witness testimonies, as people around the world waited to see how justice would be served. For Evelyn Johnson, the courtroom was both a daunting and empowering space, a place where she could finally share her truth on her own terms. Evelyn walked into the courthouse that morning dressed simply but elegantly, her posture upright and her expression calm. She carried herself with quiet dignity, even as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions outside. Marcus Reed stood by her side, his confidence bolstering hers. He had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and crafting arguments that highlighted not only the incident itself, but also the broader issues of systemic negligence within Skyline Airlines. Inside the courtroom, tensions ran high. On one side sat Evelyn and her legal team, while representatives from Skyline Airlines occupied the other. Claire Bennett was notably absent. Though subpoenaed to testify, she had chosen not to attend, citing emotional distress. Her absence didn't go unnoticed. Many viewed it as an admission of guilt or an inability to face the consequences of her actions. The trial unfolded over several days, with each session revealing new layers of the case. Passengers who had been on Flight 457 took the stand, recounting what they had witnessed during the altercation. Their accounts painted a vivid picture of Claire's hostility and Evelyn's composure. One passenger, a retired school principal named Margaret Hayes, described Evelyn as the epitome of grace under fire, adding, "She didn't retaliate or raise her voice, even when she was treated so unfairly." Skyline Airlines' defense team tried to shift blame onto Claire, arguing that her behavior was an isolated incident rather than a reflection of the company's values. They presented training manuals and employee guidelines meant to demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion. However, Marcus skillfully dismantled these claims by pointing out inconsistencies in how complaints about staff conduct were handled or ignored by management. Internal emails revealed that multiple passengers had filed grievances about Claire's attitude in the past, yet no meaningful action had been taken. As the trial progressed, Evelyn took the stand. Her testimony was powerful yet understated. She spoke softly but clearly, describing the events of that day without embellishment. When asked how the slap made her feel, she paused for a moment before responding. "It hurt, not just my face, but my heart," she said. "I've lived long enough to know that racism exists, but I never expected to experience something so blatant, especially in a place where I thought I'd be safe." Her words resonated deeply with the jury and those watching the proceedings. Even some members of Skyline's legal team appeared visibly moved, exchanging uneasy glances as Evelyn continued. She concluded her testimony by emphasizing her hope that the case would lead to positive change. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about making sure no one else has to endure what I went through." When closing arguments arrived, Marcus delivered a stirring speech that tied together all the threads of the case. He reminded the jury of Evelyn's humanity, Claire's unchecked anger, and Skyline's failure to protect its passengers. "This is more than a lawsuit. It's a call for accountability," he declared. Skyline Airlines had a duty to ensure safety and respect for everyone on that flight, regardless of race, age, or background. They failed, and now they must answer for it. After deliberating for 2 days, the jury returned with a verdict. Skyline Airlines was found liable for negligence and ordered to pay $5 million in damages to Evelyn. The decision sent shockwaves through the aviation industry, prompting discussions about workplace culture, racial bias, and passenger rights. While Skyline vowed to appeal, the ruling marked a significant victory for Evelyn and her supporters. For Evelyn, the settlement wasn't about the money, it was about validation. She announced plans to donate most of the funds to organizations fighting racial injustice, keeping only enough to cover medical expenses and personal needs. As she left the courthouse surrounded by applause, she turned to Marcus and smiled. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's just the beginning of something bigger." Though justice had been served, the ripple effects of that fateful flight continued to shape lives, some seeking redemption, others striving for reform. And at the center of it all stood Evelyn, a beacon of resilience and hope. In the weeks following the trial, Evelyn Johnson became more than just a name tied to a high-profile case. She emerged as a symbol of strength and grace. Her decision to donate most of the settlement money to organizations fighting racial injustice resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. News outlets hailed her as an inspiration, while social media users flooded platforms with messages of admiration. Hashtags like #BailacEvelyn began trending, encouraging others to embody her quiet resilience and unwavering compassion. Evelyn didn't seek the spotlight, but she also didn't shy away from it. She understood that her story had sparked important conversations about racism, accountability, and humanity. Determined to use her platform for good, She accepted invitations to speak at community events, schools, and conferences. At each appearance, she shared her experiences, not just the incident on the flight, but also the lessons she learned throughout her life as a Black woman navigating a world often shaped by prejudice. Her speeches were never accusatory or bitter. Instead, they focused on themes of forgiveness, empathy, and collective progress. "We can't change the past," she would say, her voice steady and warm, "but we can choose how we respond to it. Hatred only breeds more hatred, but kindness has the power to heal." Audiences listened intently, many moved to tears by her words. Younger generations, in particular, found hope in her message, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, one could rise above with dignity. Meanwhile, Claire Bennett's life remained a stark contrast. After losing her job, home, and relationships, she retreated further into isolation. The weight of public scorn and personal guilt pressed heavily on her shoulders. For months, she avoided leaving her cousin's house, spending hours scrolling through news articles and social media posts about the trial. Each headline felt like another blow. Skyline Airlines loses $5 million lawsuit. Evelyn Johnson inspires millions. Claire Bennett, a cautionary tale. But amidst the darkness, something shifted within her. Watching Evelyn's interviews and reading about her advocacy work planted a seed of reflection. Claire realized that while she couldn't undo what she had done, she could take steps to make amends, not for redemption, but because it was the right thing to do. Slowly, she began volunteering at a local homeless shelter, serving meals and helping organize donations. It was menial work, far removed from her previous career, but it gave her a sense of purpose. At first, the shelter staff eyed her warily, unsure of her intentions, but over time, her sincerity won them over. She worked tirelessly, often staying late to clean up or assist those in need. One evening, while handing out blankets to a group of elderly residents, she noticed a familiar-looking photo pinned to the bulletin board. It was a newspaper clipping featuring Evelyn, smiling warmly during one of her speaking engagements. Beneath it, someone had written, "Kindness starts here." Claire stared at the picture for a long moment, her throat tightening. That night, she went home and wrote another letter to Evelyn, this time mailing it instead of keeping it hidden away. In the letter, she expressed her remorse once again, acknowledging the pain she had caused. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. Your example has inspired me to start making changes, no matter how small they may seem." The letter arrived at Evelyn's doorstep days later. At first, Evelyn hesitated to open it, unsure if she was ready to confront Claire's words. But curiosity got the better of her, and she read the letter carefully, her expression unreadable. When Marcus visited later that week, he found her sitting quietly at the kitchen table, the letter folded neatly in front of her. "What do you think?" Marcus asked gently. Evelyn sighed, her gaze thoughtful. "I believe everyone deserves a chance to grow," she said finally. "Does that mean I forgive her?" "Not yet. Forgiveness isn't something you rush. It takes time. But I can see that she's trying, and maybe that's enough for now." Though their paths remained separate, both women continued moving forward, shaped irrevocably by the events of that fateful flight. Evelyn dedicated herself to spreading light, while Claire worked to rebuild her life, piece by fragile piece. Their journeys were far from over, but each step brought them closer to understanding the true meaning of accountability and the possibility of transformation. Months turned into years, and the story of Evelyn Johnson and Claire Bennett continued to resonate with people around the world. What had started as a single moment of conflict on a routine flight had grown into something much larger, a testament to the complexities of human nature, the power of forgiveness, and the enduring hope for change. Evelyn's advocacy work flourished in ways she never could have imagined. She became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the country to share her message of resilience and unity. Schools named scholarships after her, and community centers invited her to lead workshops on empathy and racial awareness. Her photo album, once a private treasure, became a symbol of her journey. She often brought it along to events, showing young audiences pictures of her late husband, Charles, and their grandchildren. "These memories remind me of what truly matters," she'd say. "Love, family, and the connections we make with others." Her efforts inspired countless individuals, including some who had initially doubted whether real progress was possible. One such person was Marcus Reed, whose involvement in the case reignited his passion for civil rights law. He went on to specialize in cases involving discrimination and corporate accountability, crediting Evelyn for opening his eyes to the broader impact of legal advocacy. "She taught me that justice isn't just about winning lawsuits, it's about creating a better future," he said during an interview. As for Claire, her road to redemption was neither quick nor easy. Volunteering at the homeless shelter gave her a renewed sense of purpose, but rebuilding trust with society proved far more challenging. Many remained skeptical of her intentions, questioning whether someone capable of such cruelty could genuinely change. Yet Claire persisted, finding solace in small acts of kindness. Over time, she earned the respect of those she worked alongside, though she accepted that full forgiveness from strangers might never come. One day, while sorting donations at the shelter, Claire received unexpected news. Evelyn had mentioned her in a speech. During a panel discussion about second chances, Evelyn spoke briefly about Claire's volunteer work, acknowledging her efforts without naming her directly. "Change begins when we choose to confront our flaws," Evelyn said. "And sometimes, even those who hurt us deeply can find their way back to humanity." Though brief, the comment carried immense weight, offering Claire a glimmer of validation she hadn't realized she needed. Years later, fate brought them together again, not face to face, but through a shared cause. A national campaign against workplace discrimination launched, featuring stories of individuals who had overcome adversity. Evelyn agreed to participate, sharing her experience on the flight and its aftermath. To everyone's surprise, Claire submitted her own story anonymously, detailing her fall from grace and her ongoing commitment to self-improvement. The campaign organizers connected the two narratives, highlighting how both women had grown in different yet meaningful ways. Though they never met in person, their parallel journeys underscored a powerful truth: no one is defined solely by their worst moments. For Evelyn, the incident reinforced her belief in compassion and forgiveness. For Claire, it served as a painful but necessary catalyst for transformation. Together, their stories reminded the world that accountability and growth are intertwined, that mistakes, no matter how grave, don't have to be the end of someone's story. The legacy of Flight 457 lived on, not as a tale of anger or division, but as a beacon of hope. It challenged people to reflect on their own actions and consider the ripple effects of their choices. As Evelyn often said in her speeches, we all have the power to rise above our lowest points. What matters most is what we do next, and whether we choose to let love guide us forward. In the end, the story wasn't just about Evelyn or Claire, it was about all of us, about the moments that test our character, the lessons we learn along the way, and the infinite potential for healing and renewal. And perhaps most importantly, it was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always room for light.